Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Warhammer 40,000 Dawn of War 2 Chaos Rising for PC. This is the first of two standalone expansion packs to Warhammer 40k Dawn of War 2, and it's actually the only one that interfaces directly with Dawn of War 2, which I'll get to in a moment. But it was developed by Relic Entertainment and published originally by THQ in March of 2010, although it is now published by Sega, and Sega now owns Relic, so it makes sense for that. But with the impending shutdown of Games for Windows Live in July, there's a very good chance that this game will become completely unplayable. I don't know if it will or not. I haven't heard anything with regards to patching Games for Windows Live out of this thing or anything like that. But there is a very good chance that this game will become unplayable, and that's why I'm reviewing it now. This is also the only expansion pack for Dawn of War 2 that interfaces directly with Dawn of War 2. What I mean by that is, you can get this and play it on its own, as just Chaos Rising, a standalone game, with the Chaos Rising campaign and any of the content for multiplayer, like Last Stand mode and the Skirmish Mode, that is specifically in Dawn of War 2, Chaos Rising. I mean, if you have Dawn of War 2, and you have them installed at the same time, you have them activated to the same account, then you actually get all of the content from Dawn of War 2, plus the additional content for all of that stuff that Chaos Rising provides. Meaning you can play the Dawn of War 2 campaign, you can play the Chaos Rising campaign, and you can play as any of the factions from Dawn of War 2, so long as you have Dawn of War 2. Otherwise, you're just limited to the content that is specifically in Chaos Rising. It's a pretty typical Relic thing since the original Dawn of War. So, it's a pretty interesting way of doing expansion packs, and I actually rather like it. Because if you don't like one particular style of play, I mean, you can go grab Chaos Rising or Dawn of War 2 and be perfectly happy with either one, or you can get both and have all of the content together. So, the real question here, since a lot of the content is pretty much the same from Dawn of War 2, and I said a lot of things about Dawn of War 2 in my review of that, I'm not going to go over all of that stuff, because pretty much all of that still applies here. What I'm going to go over instead is what this adds to the game and whether it is a welcome addition or not. Now, they really didn't change the presentation all that much. All they really did was add on some new content to what was already there. So that fits in very well with what you had in the base game. You have a couple of new environments, which fit in very well, and you have the whole Chaos faction, as well as some new units for the previous factions that were in Dawn of War 2 base. All of this fits in very well with the style that was done in the original version of the game, and in particular the Chaos faction fits very well. They are certainly very chaosy, or chaotic is the better term. They're insane, they revel in being insane, and they fit in with that Warhammer vibe very well. They've done, again, a great job of porting that Warhammer 40k vibe into a video game. So, there's really not all that much to talk about as far as presentation goes, other than saying it's right up there with the base game as far as its quality goes. But obviously what really matter are the story of the campaign, as well as the various additions that they did to the gameplay itself. The story in this takes place about a year after the events of Dawn of War 2, in which you were repelling the Tyranid invasion, as well as the orcs and everything. And in this one, you find that the planet Aurelia has appeared after being lost to the warp for over a millennium. And there's this distress signal, this Bloodraven's distress signal, that is popping up from the planet. So the Force Commander and his strike force end up going to the planet to investigate, and end up getting ambushed by traitor guardsmen. And this sets in motion the events that lead to the unveiling of Chaos. And you end up fighting the hordes of Chaos throughout the game. Now, this also introduces an interesting mechanic, which is the corruption mechanic. The idea is that Space Marines are corruptible. That's why the traitor legions exist in the first place. And in this particular instance, they have decided to expand upon that idea by giving you choices throughout the game. Various objectives on the side that are redemption or corruption. And they also give you access to various items, war gear, that is only usable if you're of a certain morality. So you do have a choice. Do you want to be the corrupted Chaos Marine? Do you want to lead your squad down that chaos path, or do you want to stick to the service of the Imperium? And they've done an interesting job of throwing that into the actual gameplay, because apart from the standard gameplay that was in the campaign in Dawn of War 2, they've thrown in these side objectives that will change your morality. And some of that corrupted gear is pretty powerful. So you do have incentive for going the corrupted route, and it does change the outcome of the plot. There are several different endings depending on how corrupted you are. So they've added in more of that RPG style to this particular game. I don't particularly like how it turned out, though, because the way they've done the leveling in this game in particular just feels off. You see, in Dawn of War 2, your guys leveled up over time, and that would give them access to better war gear, to more abilities, and such like that. Well, in Chaos Rising, they start off at fairly high level. They've extended the level cap to 30, but they start you off right around level 20, so you're already really powerful. You've got a lot of abilities, you've got a lot of really powerful war gear, and you get thrown into this thing and find out that suddenly you're weak. And I didn't really understand that going into this thing. It felt like they just didn't understand the leveling system. Either that, or they just really ramped up the difficulty for Chaos Rising, because it's not easy. It's certainly not the pushover that a lot of the stuff was in the base Dawn of War 2. Maybe they took that into account with Chaos Rising and just decided, you know what, we're just going to make the game harder. But honestly, when you're going after the side objectives, the corruption or redemption stuff, I found that in particular going after the redemption stuff felt tedious, because it kept diverting you from the main objectives and forcing you to go off of the side thing if you wanted to stay pure in the eyes of the Emperor. So I found that the corruption is the quick and easy path, like Vader took, whereas redemption is obviously the harder path. Obviously, it's a conscious choice you have to make, and I just don't particularly like how the gameplay in the campaign feels. It is that real-time tactics style. It does have access to your various squads right at the beginning, and they do add in some new stuff like Jonah, for instance, the librarian, so you now have a psyker on your team. But all in all, I felt like the Chaos Rising campaign retained a lot of the problems from the campaign in Dawn of War 2, and it introduced its own problems by having that corruption mechanic, which, while well-intentioned, just doesn't work out as well as it probably should. The other additions to the game were pretty much on the multiplayer side of things. They added in a bit of new content to the Last Stand mode, like having the, of course, Chaos Sorcerer and the Tyranid Hive Tyrant. And that's pretty much it, really. And then to the Skirmish Mode, they added in a bunch of new units for all of the factions that were already in Dawn of War 2. And then they also added in the Chaos faction, which obviously has its own bonuses and such like that, and its own set of units and how they play out and all that sort of thing. Still plays out pretty much like the Skirmish Mode from Dawn of War 2, only with some additional content, which is always welcome, of course. I personally don't like playing as the Chaos faction. I feel like they are possibly a bit underpowered. Now, it may just be that the AI is still busted up and has issues. and that's why I'm not enjoying it so much. But it feels like Chaos is a bit underpowered. Maybe, again, it's just the AI playing tricks on me, but it just feels like Chaos is a bit underpowered compared to the other factions. Now, granted, at least they're not the Eldar, which felt really underpowered, but that's beside the point, right? At any rate, it's nice to have this new content. I just feel like this expansion as a whole is just really underwhelming. The stuff it adds in is nice to have, and if you really like playing as Chaos, then it's great, but I feel like the stuff that they threw in here just doesn't fit quite as well as the content from the original Dawn of War 2 did. And it still has that problem, not really knowing what it wants to be. Because there are moments when the game's really fun, particularly in the skirmish mode. But you have that, frankly, slog of a campaign, which, despite being good intentioned and having this new mechanic thrown in there that's supposed to be more compelling, but ends up not being, it just feels like they still couldn't decide whether they wanted to go for the real-time tactics with RPG elements route, which it seems like they were trying to push it more towards that, or for the more traditional style of RTS that the skirmish mode has. Because, frankly, the game really only works at its best during skirmish mode. And again, I couldn't play Last Stand mode. Nobody plays Last Stand in base Dawn of War 2 and Chaos Rising. Nobody. So I couldn't get into that, really. But I never liked that mode in Retribution anyway, so it's an odd situation. It's got more content. That content is the same level of quality, for the most part, as Dawn of War 2 base. And so if you just really wanted the Chaos faction, you'll probably get something out of Chaos Rising. But if you're like me and you were looking for something a bit different from Dawn of War 2, maybe a more throwback kind of game, something more in line with the original Dawn of War, then you're going to be disappointed. Because they tried to push it more towards the RPG aspects and the real-time tactics side of things, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But they just didn't pull off the execution as well as they should have. So ultimately, I give this a 2.5 out of 5. Thanks for watching.